But seemingly nothing can heal the widening breach between the Soviets and Peking. The Chinese are hell-bent on proving that their type of militant communism is the only true path to victory over the capitalist world. They openly call for a repudiation of the Soviet leadership by the world's communist parties. Ho and his party are at a crossroads. The old leader rises and in a quavering voice pleads for reconciliation between the two brother parties. But the Chinese stomp out and expect the North Vietnamese to follow suit. Ho leaves the Congress, but instead of going home, he travels about Russia and finds time to dance with the students at Minsk High School. CBS News chief European correspondent Charles Collingwood asks British scholar P.J. Honey of London University about Ho and the Sino-Soviet split.
Obviously, he's interested in the Sino-Soviet dispute. He has walked his tightrope. He has moved closer to China or to Russia as the occasion demanded. But this is really something outside. He's only interested in it insofar as it affects the running of his state and the execution of the policies of that state. I would describe him as a communist, but primarily as the ruler of North Vietnam. In other words, they're prepared to kowtow to the Chinese, but if the Chinese start intervening in North Vietnam, then the Vietnamese are not prepared to stand this.
All that Peking has offered North Vietnam so far is a great deal of bellicose speeches.
Professor Fall.
You can just visualize a meeting of this small in-group and the Muscovites saying to the Pekingites in the group, you see what we got from all your soft from your big talking? You're bombed by the United States. We're now embroiled in an open-ended war because the war is open-ended on both sides.
What about the possibility of Peking raising volunteers, unquote?
That is always possible, but again, Giap has enough troops to feed into South Vietnam for the next 5 or 8 to 10 years while they're running out of troops in the north. Here again, we speak of, after all, of almost a 500,000-man army, which has more than 1 million men of trained reserves. And they feed them in at the present rate of about 40,000 troops a year. So they can go on for a long time.
In the meantime, however, the North Vietnamese are intervening on their own in South Vietnam. Nguyen Hue Tho, the rarely seen leader of the Viet Cong, as the South Vietnamese Liberation Front is commonly called, operates from a headquarters deep in South Vietnam's jungles. What had started out in 1957 as a guerrilla operation has erupted into a major war involving more than 1 million men. The American response to the spreading war is first to send in advisors to the South Vietnamese army. When this proves insufficient, President Johnson orders the bombing of North Vietnam in February of 1965 and the landing of American military forces in March. In April, he offers Ho unconditional discussions, as in 1946, there were perhaps missed opportunities on both sides. But Ho's counteroffer, in the form of 4 points, is tantamount to a demand for Western surrender. Apparently, like the French, the Americans must be totally defeated, as American air power systematically destroys North Vietnamese military targets. Ho's country becomes a country once more at war. Children are evacuated from Hanoi, and North Vietnamese anti-aircraft guns and Russian SAM missiles take their toll of American warplanes. Then comes the pause in American bombing of North Vietnam, December 24th, 1965. But Hanoi still lives in fear of U.S. airstrikes. Ho again makes the rounds of his troops, playing the old role of kindly uncle. He still counts on more plentiful Soviet support. Such aid was promised by Soviet Premier Kosygin back in February 1965 and by Russian Party Secretary Shalepin in January 1966. Their councils of moderation were violently attacked by Peking, while Hanoi remained silent. This may be an indication that Ho has swerved toward Peking, or as some observers feel, that he no longer is in control of the situation or is in failing health. Professor P.J. Honey.
Physically, I think he's probably still reasonably healthy. But mentally, he's been on the slide for at least 18 months. He is, as far as I can make out, subject to periods of lucidity, but in between these, he's not really in control of his mental faculties. Consequently, when people visit North Vietnam, if he happens to be in good form, Ho Chi Minh is marched in and he talks to them, he has his photograph taken with them, he impresses them with his vitality and with his sense of humor. But I don't think any longer he is allowed to take major political decisions.
One of the Western journalists to see Ho Chi Minh most recently found no evidence of any senility. British newspaperman James Cameron.
The door opens and in comes none other than Uncle Ho himself, looking, I must say, in uncommonly good form for a man of rising 76. He moved over without any sort of introduction and sat down and poured himself a bottle of beer and started to smoke what it must have been about 200 cigarettes. And, well, if indeed it is the case that he's paraded in his few lucid moments, this must have been certainly one of them, because he gave me the impression of being physically very active. And certainly, in no sense did he talk like a gaga old character. But it is quite true to say he wouldn't talk about politics. When he came over, first of all, he wouldn't be photographed properly. He says, "Today I don't feel photogenic." And he sat down. I said to him, "You know you're the most photogenic old man in Asia. Well, you know this." He said, "Not today, I'm not."
Perhaps as often in the past, when in a difficult situation, Ho prefers to let the younger leaders bear the brunt of the unpopular decisions, while he keeps up his kind old uncle image. Professor Fall.
Ho Chi Minh personally told me, he says, well, it took us 8 years to lick you, the French. It'll probably take us 10 years to deal with the Americans, but we'll hold out. Well, the fact is, what he never realized, that the Americans aren't just 3-4 times stronger than the French, but something like 10th to the power of the French. To give you a precise example, the French had a total combat air force of 200 airplanes. The United States uses 300 airplanes a day in some of those major raids. So very obviously, there's a great deal of agonizing reappraising going on in North Vietnam. So Ho Chi Minh makes those mistakes. But internally, what sounds to us as being extremely harsh or rough, you know, the American imperialists must leave Vietnam, that's what his people likes to hear. This is the sort of old give 'em hell Harry of President Truman. And of course, they are up against the biggest power in the world, and there are 18 million people. Ho Chi Minh is of the blood, sweat, and tears school. You don't fight a revolution for 30 years getting clobbered at every turn until finally you come out on top without being of the blood, sweat, and tears school. It's dangerous to second think or to second guess a man like Ho Chi Minh. Yeah, they're much more complicated than that. But I'm very much afraid that if Ho Chi Minh were to make up his mind that this is the war to see through, that he might just be the man to see it through too.
The aged president is still a ferocious nationalist and a shrewd communist revolutionary. This month, the United States made abundantly clear its willingness to negotiate for peace. It's now up to the old man in Hanoi.